UFC 274 is almost here. I'm going to give you my final picks. We're going to talk a lot about strategy today, and we're going to build some lineups later in the video, so make sure you watch until the end. You can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. I'm going to tell you right now, this slate is terrified. This slate is scared because it knows we're coming. So what I want you to do is ball up your fists, level your eyes, and get ready to put this slate in the goddamn dirt. And if you haven't, go back and watch the video from earlier in the week. That's where we go over the slate fighter by fighter, salary by salary, talk about spots that we like and spots that we don't like. This is the final picks video where we'll talk about changes, strategy, and what we need to do to be successful this week. The first change to the slate is we have Andre Fialho fighting Cameron VanCamp this week. VanCamp is making his UFC debut, and he's going to get beat up, I'll tell you that now. VanCamp has a nice record, but he's really not been fighting the highest level of competition. Most of it's been outside of the UFC, and I really expect him to struggle in this fight, especially when it's on the feet. Fialho looked great in his last fight, not only from a technique standpoint, but also just physically. He looked like a tank. That tells us that he's taking his training very seriously, and he wanted to fight the week after he knocked out Miguel Baeza in the first round, and I think we see him pick up another finish in this spot as well. Now, clearly, he is expensive this week, so it may be hard for you to get to him, but when you look at the matchup that he has and the price that he's at, if you're choosing between Andre Fialho and Michael Chandler, I think that if you had to pay up for one of them, this is the smarter way to go. You'd want to be on this side, the Andre Fialho side, just because he has a much better matchup. But the addition of this fight to the slate has been the only major change. Outside of that, we still have a lot of fights to work with, 15 fights to work with. And so far, they've all held up, but make sure you're watching right up until the end. Fighters could miss weight, fighters could pull out, fights can be canceled. It seems like it's happening every week at this point. We had Tatsuru pulled from the card just 2 hours before the event was supposed to start, and he was the first fight, so don't get caught sleeping. Now, I've looked a lot at this slate throughout the week, and from what I can see, I think this is a mid-range kind of week. I say that because if you look at 9,000 and above, there are some clear spots that you really don't feel great about from a fantasy scoring perspective. First would be Norma Dumont. She's 9,100. There's no way I'm playing her at this price. So that would make about as much sense as Tony Ferguson has been making during his press conferences this week. Tony Ferguson will sit up there during press conferences and be like, hey, if you bet on me, you're going to be rich and lose all your money. And that to me makes as much sense as playing Norma Dumont. I don't think that she'll score nearly enough for you to want to play her at this price, for her to be worth it at this price. Clear fade option, in my opinion. She's probably going to come in at really low ownership, but it's for good reason. Next is OSP. Now, he could totally end up on the winning lineup, of course, if he scores a knockout here. And this price is reasonable for the kind of outcome that you could expect, but can you trust him? He's super low output. Physically, he may not be coming into this fight in the best shape. It looks like the cut down to 205 pounds is very hard for him to make nowadays. And it's OSP. You like that he's active, but since 2018, he's 3-6, and he really hasn't looked good. He may win this fight on the basis that Shogun is shot, and he's ancient for this sport, not only in terms of his age, but just mileage as well. But I actually think that Shogun is live for a first round finish because OSP is just so hard to trust. And then if we come up to 9,400, we have Kleydson Rodrigues. He's fighting CJ Vergara this week. He's not going to finish CJ Vergara, and he probably isn't going to wrestle much either, and he's making his debut. So there are a lot of things that I don't like about Kleydson Rodrigues in this spot. And this will be in front of a full crowd in Arizona in the full-sized cage, so you can expect a lot of footwork, movement, and that kind of stuff kills DraftKings scores most of the time. Rodrigues has fought low-level guys primarily, and I actually prefer the Vergara side of this matchup, so I would suggest staying away from Rodrigues. I personally will not play him. I don't think you need a lot of exposure to him either, just because if he wins, probably doesn't score that many points, and I'm not really that high on him to win anyway. And then lastly, you have Michael Chandler. See, at this price, you absolutely need a finish from him inside the first round to make him viable. But outside of that, I see an 80-point performance where this fight goes the distance. He's probably going to pull a decent amount of ownership as well, but I do think it's unwise to play him up at this price, especially if you're playing contests in smaller fields like single entry type of games. If you're building a lot of lineups, like if you're in a 20 max contest that you've maxed out, or you're building 150 lineups, then I would say to keep your player pool wide. That's always smart, but I would also recommend keeping Norma Dumont and Kleydson Rodrigues out of that pool. I think you can get away with some exposure to OSP. You can get away with some exposure to Michael Chandler, but those other two I would recommend staying away from. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, I'm only telling you this for your own good. I was told that if you watch the videos and you don't subscribe, it's bad luck, and I'm not going to tell you where I heard it from, but it's something that I heard. Make sure you also drop a like on the video and comment something in the comments for the algorithm. I don't care what it is, you know how the algorithm works. And we're going to start building lineups soon, but before we build lineups, we have to look at the salary savers. We have to look at the dollar menu, the expired meat at the market, the everything must go. I'm talking about the value plays at 8,000 and below. The first value play that I see is Rude Boy Wagwan Randy Brown. He's going to be fighting Khaos Williams this week. Both sides of this fight should carry high ownership, I'm sure of it. And this is where we're going to start really getting into the strategy of things, because this is important. People are going to be all over Williams for the knockout upside over a man in Randy Brown who we've seen knocked out before. And Randy Brown, he's going to pull ownership because he'll have the perceived grappling advantage and obviously a huge edge in experience at the highest level. Now, when you look at these guys side by side, Randy Brown is probably going to have the better output. He's probably going to be the one throwing more strikes. And given his experience, I do expect him to have slightly better footwork. So I can honestly see this fight going either way, but most importantly, I see this fight going the distance. And again, most of the field is going to be playing one of these guys, but if you look at how they score in decisions, it hasn't been great. Randy Brown has 3 decision wins in the UFC where he's scored 63, 71, and 77 DraftKings points, so he's averaging 70 points when he wins and sees the judges' scorecards. Khaos Williams has 1 decision win in the UFC where he scored 74 points over Matt Semmelsberger, and also Williams has no takedowns in the UFC. On the other side, Randy Brown averages less than 1 takedown per 15 minutes. He hasn't secured a whole lot in his UFC career, and he's probably not going to be looking to wrestle either. And when we consider the power on the side of Williams, you should expect Brown to have a careful, patient approach on the feet, and we aren't in the apex, so again, the bigger cage could result in more movement, more footwork, more careful and diligent and patient approach from the longer fighter in Randy Brown. The winner of this fight could very possibly score less than 80 DraftKings points, and that's not going to be enough to show up on the optimal lineup. They're also going to come in at really high ownership. So I've changed my mind on this fight. First I thought Khaos Williams by knockout, but I think that we're looking at a situation where either guy can win. It's going to go the distance. It's probably going to be close. There's going to be difficult rounds to judge, but these guys don't wrestle all that much. They're probably not going to look to wrestle. They'll probably have a slower pace at the start of the fight. And you're looking at a situation where with the ownership, if you're staying away from them on DraftKings, that's probably the wise move. Our next value play at 7,700 is Justin Gaethje. He's going to be our main event underdog, and if you watched the video earlier in the week, you know that I expect him to lose. I think that Charles Oliveira is better almost everywhere, and I expect him to finish Gaethje inside the first 2 rounds. But we can't ignore the skill set and finishing ability on this side of the matchup. We've seen Justin Gaethje fight 9 times in the UFC. He's only gone the distance once. And most of his UFC wins have been first or second round knockouts, and Charles Oliveira has been clipped in the opening rounds recently, so obviously there is value on this side. There's that finishing upside, and there's this really low price. And while the wins are impressive, in hindsight, he finished Michael Johnson, who's now 19 and 17, James Vick, who could be knocked out by a heavy gust of wind, Edson Barboza is 3 and 7 in his last 10, the old cowboy is a shell of himself, and the Tony Ferguson win I thought was actually pretty solid. But he is losing to guys at the top. He gets finished by Eddie Alvarez, finished by Dustin Poirier, finished quickly by Khabib, and I expect him to be finished again this weekend. Now, if you're going to be building multiple lineups, it's wise to have some exposure to Gaethje. I wouldn't go too heavy on him. We'll build lineups later in the video with him, though, so that we can get an idea of where he fits in, and I think there's solid value here. Obviously, if he wins, it's going to be inside the distance, and he's going to score a lot of points. Our next value play is Journey Newson. He's going to be fighting Fernie Garcia this week. This is also going to be the first fight on the card. I really like Journey Newson here. I think he's got the better boxing and obviously the much bigger punching power. I expect him to hit Fernie Garcia harder than he's ever been hit before, and he's got some UFC experience under his belt already. Now, you may look at these DraftKings scores and think, what the hell is even that? And I understand your concern, but I will say this was a debut against Ricardo Ramos, who has looked pretty good and is a decent grappler who pretty much just out-grappled Newson the whole time. He got KO'd with basically the first strike that Randy Costa threw, which was a perfect head kick inside the first minute of the first round. That wasn't a great look, but Randy Costa does have that in his locker for sure. But when you look at this fight with Domingo Pilardi, if you don't know what happened, you'll look at this 13 points and think that's abysmal, that's terrible. But it was deemed a no contest for weed.
The weed!
But it was a knockout inside the first minute. So at the time, if you had Journey Newson that day, you were looking at a DraftKings score of 128 points, and he was on the optimal lineup. And on the other side, Fernie Garcia has been in a ton of close fights. A lot of his fights are going to decision. A lot of his fights are split decisions. So if this fight goes the distance and hopefully Newson's cardio holds up, then Newson could steal rounds based on bigger moments, based on harder shots being landed. Decent value here at 7,600, even in a decision win. Our next value play at 7,500 is Melissa Gatto, and I do want to say from a theory standpoint, women's MMA comes with a couple of truths. The first truth is that the over round prop is extremely safe. We talked about the data surrounding that earlier in the week and why you should always bet the over round prop if you can. That'll be linked in the description, the video from earlier in the week, and you can see when we break that down. And the second thing about women's MMA is that odds mean nothing. Some of the biggest upsets of all time in MMA have come from women's MMA. Holly Holm over Rousey, Dobson over Agapova, Juliana Pena beats Amanda Nunes. And these are massive favorites that we're losing, but if we went a step further and we're looking at favorites that are around minus 150, minus 200, minus 300 in that range, even recently we've seen losers like Gina Mazzani, Carol Hoza, Corey McKenna, Estela Nunes. This is happening all the time. So now when we look at this card, we have 4 women's fights, and the 4 favorites are Rose, Dumont, Cortez, Lupi Godinez. And I'll tell you now, at least one of them will lose. And I think the most likely of the 4 to lose is probably Tracy Cortez. Now, I like Tracy Cortez because of the strong grappling, the strong wrestling base, the downward pressure, but clearly Melissa Gatto is the more dangerous fighter in this matchup. And unlike many of the people that Cortez has fought before, Gatto doesn't mind being on bottom where she has the skills to execute sweeps, submissions, plus she has cardio to go the whole 15 minutes. And when this fight is fought on the feet, I think Melissa Gatto is going to be far ahead of Tracy Cortez. So I think Melissa Gatto down at 7,500, there's decent value to be had there. Next at 7,400, you have Joe Lauzon, and you have Joe Lauzon as a value play because everyone is live against Cowboy nowadays for obvious reasons. I do think that Cowboy is still the more skilled fighter, and I think the longer this goes, the more it favors Donald Cerrone, but you can't count out Joe Lauzon early. I do think that he'll take it to him in that first round, and if Cowboy can't weather that storm, Joe Lauzon's going to put up a ton of points. You come down to Carla Esparza, same logic applies here with the women's MMA. She can win this fight. She could steal rounds with her wrestling. We saw Wei Li take Rose down with ease in their rematch, and Carla's a much stronger wrestler, so value here, of course. My worry for Esparza is that she gets completely outstruck on the feet and knocked out, but at the same time, I could see a situation where she steals 3 out of 2 rounds based on her wrestling. Solid value here. I still do prefer the champion in this spot, but I think that Carla Esparza does have a pretty clear path to victory. Ariane Carnelossi, you're hoping that she's able to get it done just based on the physical strength. Maybe Lupi gets tired later in the fight, but at the same time, I think that Lupi down at this weight class with a full training camp, I don't think she's going to get tired. I think she'll be able to take Carnelossi down with ease, and I think Carnelossi might even get tired later in this fight because she's going to have to work her way up to the feet probably 3 or 4 times after those takedowns. Shogun, I mean, this guy is a legend. It would be incredible to see him get a W on his way out, knock out OSP, and just ride off into the sunset. That's what I would hope as an MMA fan, but you never know. Again, this guy is ancient for the sport just with the mileage, with his age. 40 years old for you 40-year-olds or those who are older. It's not real life old, just MMA old. CJ Vergara, I think that there is a clear path to victory here for him. I think he's got the cleaner, tighter boxing and probably more punching power. I think the kicking advantage lies on the side of Kleydson Rodrigues, and he might be able to use that to maintain distance. If you're going to attack this fight, you might as well attack the Vergara side. I think it makes a lot more sense than paying up for Kleydson Rodrigues to score 75 points and a decision win. And then Blades and Shades, the Darce Knight rises. The Darce Knight might rise again. You're looking at a situation where Tony's got really good front kicks to the body. He's got really good forward pressure. Michael Chandler doesn't fight that well off the back foot. You look at him and think he's kind of a shell of himself based on the 3 losses, but at the same time, I mean, this is literally the top of the division outside of Islam Makhachev and Dustin Poirier. And not for nothing, if this was a fight that was fought 5 years ago, I think that he batters Michael Chandler, and Michael Chandler's only 36, 2-year difference between these two guys, so it's not a huge difference whatsoever. And while Michael Chandler's a good wrestler, he's not going to be able to have the same kind of control that Charles Oliveira or Beneil Dariush had, because I mean, look at these scores: 9 and 11 in 3 rounds that go to decision. You're only scoring 9 points. That's terrible. But at the same time, that's just having no answer for the grappling, the submission grappling, the submission threat from both of those men. Michael Chandler doesn't present that same kind of challenge. Michael Chandler is a big overhand, strong wrestling, but that's about it. So I do think there's a path to victory for Tony Ferguson, and I do think that he's a good punt play potentially if you wanted to try to get him in your cash game lineups. But I do think that there's a different way that I'm going to go in cash, and I'm going to show you that now. So now we'll start building lineups. I'm going to start with cash game lineups, and then we'll get more unique as we go along, looking at some tournament builds. I'm going to build a cash game lineup for you now. My mind could change, so make sure you follow Kunith MMA on Twitter so that you can get my official cash game lineup before lock. Last time I did it, it cashed every single time. We made our money back from Gina Mazzani taking it all in the tournaments. So watch now, follow later, pay attention. Let's make some money this week. So when it comes to cash games, I'm thinking that you have to target the 5-round fights. I'm looking at Charles Oliveira to get the job done. And I'm looking to stack the co-main event because I think that Rose is probably going to win. I think she wins 3 out of 2 rounds, which means those other 2 rounds that Carla Esparza wins, she's winning it because she's getting takedowns, control time, and ground and pound. She throws a lot of strikes on the ground. So if we go ahead and stack that up, I'll even show you here too. If you look at a 3-round loss against Claudia Gadelha, she scored 66 points, and that was in a 3-round loss. So you're looking at a situation where over 5 rounds, if she secures more than 2 takedowns, she probably is going to get 4 or 5, honestly. Then she's going to score a good amount of points. And even if she doesn't and wins, then she scores a ton of points. So I think that stacking this up makes a lot of sense, and I think the striking output from Rose Namajunas will keep you in it as well. So now you have 84-33 left. I'm going to come down here and punt CJ Vergara. The reason why I say punt CJ Vergara is just look at how he scored against Ode Osborne in a 3-round loss. 48 points. I mean, I'll take that in a loss for sure. But now we have 92.50 left over, so we can come up here. You can grab somebody like Lupi Godinez, for example, and then you can come all the way up to Andre Fialho if you'd like, who I think has a good matchup. And if you weren't sold on Andre Fialho, then you could come down here to Brandon Royval, who I think has just as much finishing upside. I think if you go with either Fialho or Royval, I think that that will be enough for you to cash in your contests. But for the sake of this, I am going to go with Brandon Royval here, and this is probably what I end up landing on, but my mind could change. Again, make sure you watch on Twitter to see if that changes at all. Now for tournaments, there are a lot of different ways that you can look at this. There are a couple of fights that you probably want to stay away from, or at least fighters that you want to stay away from in tournaments. Again, I'm looking to stay away from Rodrigues. I'm looking to stay away from Norma Dumont. I'm looking to stay away from Fernie Garcia, who I don't think is going to score that many points even if he wins. Blagoy Ivanov probably doesn't score that many points if he wins. And I really don't think that Danny Roberts has the skill set to beat Massaran Duba. I think that he's going to get manhandled, especially later this fight goes. I think that old man strength is going to give him serious trouble, especially in the clinch. So these are fighters that I'm probably staying away from. These are fighters that I would exclude from your player pools if you're playing 150 lineups. Now, this is just my opinion. You don't have to do exactly what I'm saying. You do your own research, but this is what I'm looking at, and this is what I think will happen. So if you're playing tournaments, obviously you're looking for upside. You're looking for people who can either get finishes or just dominate with their wrestling. So first and foremost, Charles Oliveira, that's going to be a staple. That's going to be a core piece this week. Now, I'm going to get expensive early. I'm looking at Brandon Royval because of the finishing upside. Now we have 8,050 left per fighter to work with. Let's say we throw Journey Newson into the mix. We have 8,200 left to spend, so we're probably going to have to come down here again. Let's say you wanted to go the Melissa Gatto side of things, just the more dangerous fighter in her matchup. Then you've got 8,550 left to spend, which means that you could comfortably try to sit in this mid-range. You could grab somebody like Khaos Williams if you're hoping for knockout upside. But I think what I would do in this situation is probably go with Trinaldo. So now we have 8,900 left over. We could come up to Rose if we wanted to with 5 rounds to work. But I think that at this point, it would be wise for you to go with Donald Cerrone, hoping that you can get that finishing upside. Here you have potential finishing upside. Same here. You've got the more dangerous fighter, and then obviously these two are going to win inside the distance if they win. And if you wanted to attack the 5-round upside because it still makes sense, then you can go grab Rose. Just know that she's going to come in at much higher ownership than Cowboy would. If you want to come down from Rose, you want to come down from Royval, and you want to play more of that mid-range, well then you can do a little something different. Say you wanted to grab Lupi Godinez, you have 8,200 left to work. You want to take a shot on OSP, again, in larger fields, that makes sense, but in what I play, the higher stakes, smaller field kind of stuff, I would be worried about playing OSP. It's hard guy to trust. If you weren't sold on Melissa Gatto and you wanted to go the other way with Tracy Cortez, obviously we're going to have to start saving some salary here. We can come off of OSP, and now we're looking at Randy Brown potentially, we're looking at Joe Lauzon potentially, or you can come all the way down here to CJ Vergara and you still have 1,200 to work with, so obviously you'll change some things from there. Maybe you get off of Massaran Duba and you come back up here to somebody like Brandon Royval, and now you're looking at a situation where you have decent favorite, decent favorite, decent favorite, decent favorite. You've got the more dangerous fighter in Journey Newson, the guy who's going to land the harder punches. And then you're hoping that CJ Vergara does what he did in the 3rd round against Ode Osborne a little bit earlier in this fight. And you're hoping that Kleydson Rodrigues kind of crumbles under the bright lights of his first UFC event. Now, I think what most people in your contest will do is they will probably go to Rose. They will probably go to Charles Oliveira. I think Melissa Gatto is going to be super popular. I think Randy Brown is also going to be super popular. You might see people get to Blagoy Ivanov as well, and then come up to somebody like Donald Cerrone, or they would go to Tracy Cortez, and then they'd have to take out Melissa Gatto and play somebody else down here, and maybe come down to somebody like Ariane Carnelozzi. Now, if you don't think that Charles Oliveira is going to win, which I would understand why, and you want to come down here to somebody like Justin Gaethje, this helps you really do a lot with your lineup, because now you're going to be opening yourself up to potentially getting to some of these higher priced people like Brandon Royval. You might be able to squeeze Lupi Godinez in there as well. You might see a lot of people come up here to Khaos Williams, come down here to Melissa Gatto, 8,200 left over. You're looking at a situation where they probably go with Francisco Trinaldo, who I think just based on the way the salary is shaking out, probably going to pull a decent amount of ownership. Nothing crazy, but probably higher than what you might expect coming into this week. If you got the guys who think Team Elevation is a gift from God, then you'll see the Rose Namajunas, Justin Gaethje double up there. A lot of people going to be playing Khaos Williams again. Might come down here to somebody like Melissa Gatto, who is everybody's darling this week, and I understand why. They might like the safety of Blagoy Ivanov, knowing that Pazao is knockout or bust and Blagoy Ivanov is unknockoutable. And then they'll come up here to OSP, hoping to get that 1st round finish if possible. Or maybe even coming down to Lupi Godinez, hoping that she's able to out-wrestle her competition in this spot. I'll try to build some lineups here with Michael Chandler just to see what's possible and also give you a look as to what you'll probably see in your contests. So in this lineup, you have Michael Chandler, you have the main event, you have the co-main event, you've got Brandon Royval in a good matchup, you have Randy Brown, who's going to come in at really high ownership, both sides of this will, and then Joe Lauzon, hoping that he wins on the basis that Cerrone is shot to bits. You'll also notice that there's no salary left on the table. I expect a lot of people to do that as well. This is something that you'll probably see in a lot of your contests. Now, if people don't want to go with the Carla Esparza side, I could still see this being a pretty popular construction. If we come off of Esparza, we come off of Royval. We take Rose Namajunas, so now you have the last 3 fights that are on the main card, and you've taken the favorite in each of them. You've got high exposure, you've got name recognition, and you've got 7,700 to work with. You'll probably come down here to either Journey Newson or Melissa Gatto at that point. And honestly, I don't hate this. I don't hate this at all. I think if this were my lineup going into it, I would probably just swap Joe Lauzon for Melissa Gatto, hoping that she could finish Cortez. This is how I think you'd be able to make your lineups if you wanted to play Michael Chandler. Now, if you want to have some fun with this and you take out Michael Chandler and you want to come all the way down to Tony Ferguson and you have 3,000 left to play with across these fighters, now you can really make something happen. I think if I'm in this situation, I'm going to take Rose out. I'm going to come back here and attack Brandon Royval. I can come off of Journey Newson and I can come all the way up here to Andre Fialho. Still have 700 to work with if I wanted to change something else. Let's say I wanted to get off Randy Brown and I was expecting a finish on the Khaos Williams side, and you have 300 left over if you wanted to change anything. But honestly, I think this is a solid lineup as well. You're just looking at a situation where you're stuck playing Tony Ferguson, which, I mean, hopefully the Dark Knight rises, right? If you have questions about your lineup, feel free to DM me on Twitter. I respond to all of them, and I respond relatively quickly for the most part. So if you want to screenshot it, send it over, tell me what you think. I'd be more than happy to take a look. And we'll wrap up here just with some straight bets that I want to share with you, some over-under prop opportunities as well. Okay, so right at the top, you have Journey Newson. This line keeps coming in. I think money's continuing to come in on him. It's for good reason. Lupi Godinez and Arniani Carnelozzi, the over 2.5 is set at minus 280, and that's because it's a safe bet. Tracy Cortez, Melissa Gatto, over 2.5 rounds because it's a safe bet. Macy Chiasson, if we look at the over in her fight, you have minus 235. And then Carla Esparza and Rose Namajunas, it's probably 4.5, right, and it's set at minus 175. I think this is pretty solid as well. The Trinaldo and Danny Roberts at minus 170 for over 2.5 makes a ton of sense. I think you could sweeten the deal though by going with Trinaldo at plus 200 to win by decision. I think that's the most likely outcome here. Randy Brown and Khaos Williams, if you go here to fight props, I think it's fight goes the distance. You can get plus money on the yes, plus 130 on the fight going the distance. I think that's a sneaky good bet. The fight with Donald Cerrone and Joe Lauzon, you can come down here to, where is it? I think it's just KO in general. You can get it for plus 100. I think one of these men are going to be finished, and it's going to be by way of TKO. And you can get Donald Cerrone at plus 165 for knockout, but I think that this would be the safer path to go. I think one of these guys' chins are going to give up on them at some point in this fight. Andre Fialho versus Cameron VanCamp. I think that the minus 135 for Andre Fialho by knockout is a solid bet in this spot. And now one bet I want to show you that I think is pretty sneaky, that I think will actually come through this week, or at least has a decent chance of coming through, is when we look at the main event. Charles Oliveira by knockout is at plus 650. Now understand this, Michael Chandler almost knocked out Charles Oliveira in the first round. He also almost knocked out Justin Gaethje in the first round. Michael Johnson almost knocked out Justin Gaethje in the first round, and when Justin Gaethje's throwing punches, they are wide, looping, overhand strikes for the most part. And against a technician like Charles, he could totally get clipped. And the thing about Charles's technique is that it's so perfect that he doesn't need to throw with power. He's got enough speed and precision that when it hits the chin, spins your jaw, and that's all that really matters. And Justin Gaethje is historically notoriously tough, but at the same time, he can get in firefights. And I think if he does that and leaves himself exposed, leaves any kind of openings for Oliveira, he's gonna get caught. So Charles Oliveira by knockout at plus 650, I think is worth a little bit of a sprinkle. So now I'll quickly go over the whole card for you. Out of 15 fights, I will give you every pick of mine here. We have Journey Newson, Lupita Godinez, CJ Vergara at big plus money, Melissa Gatto at plus 125, Masaran Duba, we've got Blagoy Ivanov, we've got Brandon Royval, Norma Dumont. I'm actually going to go the rude boy side here. We've got Andre Fialho at minus 410, Donald Cerrone. I'm going to go with Shogun. I'm going to go with Michael Chandler, and still. So we have 15 fights total. We're looking at 4 plus money plays and 2 virtually just pick 'em plays. And we're at plus 600,000 nearly. You could throw $15 at this if you want a cool 89,000. If you're not sold on some of these spots, which I'm not, you can come off of Shogun, say take OSP. You can come off of Randy Brown, take Khaos Williams. You could come off of Vergara, go with Kleydson Rodrigues. Come off of Gatto, go with Tracy Cortez. But that means that you're playing all the women's favorites. You're looking at still ridiculous odds at plus 70,000. But I think there's a couple of different combinations that you can make. But obviously, this is Hail Mary stuff. You want to do your best to try to limit the amount of parlays that you make, and not just these big, crazy, full card parlays, but even the 4, 5, 6 fight parlays, they could really burn you. I would suggest limiting your parlays to 3 different outcomes, 3 different fights, and make sure you're still getting plus odds at that point. Don't parlay 3 big favorites to get plus 100. It's not really worth it. But those are my final picks. Thank you so much for watching. If you've made it to this point in the video, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. That way I can bring more of this to you.